At the age of 23, Darcy Brown was very accustomed to the luxury and wealth which she'd been living in since her very birth. Unfortunately, the woman's mother died when she was 5 years old, but her father did everything in his power to ensure that his beloved daughter was never in need of anything. David Brown had always been a determined man, and therefore, after getting his degree, he directed all of his efforts at the development of a promising business. By the age of 30, the man had already earned his first million, and 15 years later, he increased his capital several times. But in the meantime, Mr. Brown entrusted the upbringing of his daughter to the numerous helpers who had been working in the house over the years. Unfortunately, Darcy didn't learn to respect her father's family business, and therefore, by the time she came of age, all she did was learn how to successfully spend her father's money, which he earned by years of painstaking work. Of course, David Brown tried to reason with his daughter, who was going wild, but the time for raising her had already passed, and now it was very hard to have any kind of influence on her. Darcy could spend an equivalent of the average monthly salary of an accountant or a manager in just one trip to a clothing store. Moreover, the young woman didn't seem the least bit embarrassed about throwing her father's money left and right. One day, tired of his daughter's antics, Mr. Brown decided to marry her off to the son of a congressman, thus strengthening his position in business and gaining reliable support from the influential son-in-law. To achieve his goal, the man started the memorable conversation on one of the dark February nights. "Daughter, you know that I'm not that young anymore, and the business takes more and more strength and energy from me. However, I'd like to make sure that you have everything you need in life until the end of your days," Mr. Brown said cautiously. "I don't quite understand what you're getting at, Dad," Darcy said, perplexed. Then, looking into his daughter's eyes, David Brown gathered his strength and went straight to the point of his proposal. At first, Darcy thought that her father was joking, but when the young woman heard him out, she realized that things had gone too far this time. Of course, the millionaire's daughter knew Kevin Williams. He was the son of her father's partner, but they weren't even friends, and Darcy never even thought that this man could someday become her husband. Unfortunately, Mr. Brown mistook her surprised silence for agreement and immediately set to work. Moreover, Mr. Williams also supported this union, hoping that this marriage would help improve his position in business too. Both parents were involved in planning the wedding of Darcy Brown and Kevin Williams. It was a long and thorough process. They rented out the best apartment in the city for the actual ceremony, and when the wedding day came, all the local elite gathered there. Since the groom had already taken his place, the guests were eagerly waiting for the bride to come out, glancing at their watches every now and then and casting puzzling glances at each other. The guests couldn't understand what was causing the delay. At first, David Brown was sure that his daughter would come out any minute, but when Darcy turned off her cell phone and simply ignored the wedding ceremony, the man realized that he was in for yet another scandal. "David, I'll be frank. I didn't expect such behavior from your daughter. Can you even imagine what people are going to think of me now?" said Mr. Williams, barely managing to restrain from turning to personal insults. David Brown looked at his angry partner and couldn't utter a word. The man understood that he was fully responsible for his daughter's actions in the situation, and she made a fool of him right in front of the entire city. Having returned home, the miserable father found Darcy sleeping soundly in her room. As it turned out later, the woman preferred to attend a party at a nightclub instead of her own wedding. Apparently, she was so tired after the party that she simply slept through the wedding. It was obvious that the young woman could care less about the damage she caused to her father's reputation, making him look like a fool in front of his co-workers and friends. That night, David Brown stayed at his office until almost midnight. The man kept going over all the possible options of how to curb Darcy's unbearable temper. Mr. Brown understood that anything he'd done before would be ineffective in the current situation. Thus, before going to bed, the businessman made the only decision he thought would be right, which would drastically change his daughter's life. The next morning, Darcy was sleeping in, as she usually did, when her father called her. The young woman picked up the phone, annoyed at being woken up. but when she heard her father out, she forgot all about sleeping. "Daughter, I'm leaving on a long business trip. I'm not sure when I'll come back, but that's unimportant. What's important is that I canceled all your credit cards and I bought you a house in Iowa. That's where you're going to live from now on. The guard already got the instructions and will take you to your new house," said Mr. Brown sharply and hung up before his daughter had the chance to respond. At first, Darcy didn't take her father's words seriously. She thought it was yet another threat, which was a usual thing in their relationship. "It's fine. I'll give him a couple of days. He'll calm down and give me back my credit cards," the woman thought, getting comfortable in bed and hoping to go back to her interesting dream. However, she was surprised to learn that her father wasn't joking. Soon, she heard a knock on her bedroom door. A security guard informed Darcy that she had half an hour to get ready. "Well, that's too much. What is he thinking? Does he really expect me to live on some kind of a farm?" the woman exclaimed angrily. Nevertheless, Darcy realized that this time her father was dead serious. The road to the aforementioned farm took at least 8 hours, and when the guard finally got Darcy to her destination, the woman was already quite tired. Seeing the house where she was supposed to live now, Darcy gasped in surprise and buried her head in her hands. The fact was that the house Mr. Brown had bought for his daughter looked very old and dilapidated. However, the woman didn't have time to think because the guard had already unloaded her things and got back into the car, hoping to get home before dark. Sighing sadly, Darcy took her bag and went into the house. The house was even worse on the inside than it seemed to be from the outside. The floor and all the furniture were covered with a thick layer of dust and cobwebs. "It'll take at least a month to clean it all up." "Thanks, Daddy, that's just great," Darcy whispered, starting to clean the house. Needless to say, cleaning the house turned out to be extremely hard to the young woman who never once in her life held a broom or a mop in her hands. Darcy only calmed down at about midnight when she finally managed to clean the house. Meanwhile, the woman hadn't eaten all day, except for the coffee and a croissant she had for breakfast. However, Darcy was so tired that she simply couldn't find the strength to cook, so she went to bed on an empty stomach. The next morning, Darcy was woken up by a soft knock on the door. Wondering who it could be, she opened the door and saw a frail old woman standing in the doorway, holding a wicker basket. "Well, hello, dear. My name is Amanda Goodman. I'm your neighbor. Here, I brought you some food. I know you must be hungry," said the guest in a pleasant, quiet voice. Darcy smiled affably and invited the old woman to come in. Mrs. Goodman glanced at the clean floors and smiled knowingly. The old woman realized how much time and effort cleaning the house must have taken. "So, what are your plans, dear? I see that you're going to be here for a long time. So I guess you must need a job? That's good, because the town needs a postman or woman. What do you think about it?" Mrs. Goodman asked cautiously. Hearing the old woman's words, Darcy's face turned red because she was ashamed to admit that she was a millionaire's daughter. However, after considering Mrs. Goodman's proposal for a minute or two, the woman agreed. Darcy understood that she needed to start a new life since her father had cut her off completely. To Darcy's great surprise, working as a postwoman wasn't as difficult as she assumed it would be. Delivering mail to the townspeople made Darcy feel needed because she was doing an important job and she was good at it. This realization made Darcy feel good about herself. One day, as she was passing by some house, the young woman noticed something strange in the window. Darcy's attention was attracted by a girl of 5 or 6 years old, standing on a windowsill. Tears froze in the girl's eyes, and so the postwoman went inside the house without a moment's hesitation. What Darcy saw inside made her feel uneasy. The floor was almost completely covered with empty beer bottles and cigarette butts. It seemed that this house had never been cleaned. Darcy walked carefully around the piles of trash and approached the trembling girl. "Don't be afraid, dear. I won't harm you," the postwoman said quietly and picked up the girl. Darcy had already noticed that there was no one in the house except for the child, and therefore the millionaire's daughter decided to take the girl with her. It's Molly Simpson. Her mother's name is Pamela. She's raising the girl on her own. Rumor has it that she got pregnant by some biker passing through the town. She's always been a fan of alcohol and loud parties, explained Mrs. Goodman when she saw the young neighbor carrying the little girl. How could someone do this? She's just a little child. She can't be left alone. Darcy nearly screamed, hugging the girl. Yes, you're right, dear, but you won't find Pamela. She's probably out spending time with one of her many boyfriends. You should call the police, Mrs. Goodman said, pouring the girl some warm milk. Molly ate quietly, as she hadn't eaten in days. Watching the girl drink the milk greedily, Darcy couldn't hold back her tears. Finally, when Molly was full, the young woman put her to bed. Then, having asked Mrs. Goodman to look after the child for a bit, Darcy went to the police station. Fortunately, the officer on duty turned out to be a pleasant young man who immediately volunteered to help. Thus, the first thing Bill Roberts did was put the girl's mother on the missing persons list. About a week later, Pamela Simpson was found on the outskirts of the city in the company of some shady men. One glance was enough for the police to understand that the woman was extremely drunk. When Bill Roberts told Darcy that the little girl would probably end up in an orphanage, the young woman got noticeably worried. The fact was that Darcy had grown attached to Molly during the week they spent together. She treated Molly like her adopted daughter, or maybe her younger sister. Therefore, when the young woman told Mrs. Goodman that she was thinking about adopting Molly, an approving smile stretched out on the old woman's face. You're doing the right thing, dear. She's a good girl. She doesn't deserve to end up at the orphanage, the old woman added, stroking her neighbor on the shoulder. 2 months flew by. Darcy had already gotten custody of Molly and devoted all of her free time to raising the girl. Mrs. Goodman helped her out with Molly, and so did Bill Roberts, who was very impressed by the woman's decision to adopt her. Darcy realized that what she was feeling for the police officer was more than just friendship. Actually, the young people had already been dating for 2 weeks and felt mutual attraction toward each other. Moreover, Darcy felt that she couldn't even remember her past, in which she was the daughter of a millionaire. But when 2 months later, an expensive car stopped at the woman's house, her heart skipped a beat. Darcy went out of the house with Molly sleeping in her arms and cried out with joy, "Hello, Daddy." At first, Mr. Brown thought that he'd lost his mind and was seeing things, but when he looked more closely, he realized that it all actually happened. Tears started streaming down his face when he saw police officer Bill Roberts hugging his daughter by the shoulders. The man realized that having moved to this remote farm, his daughter changed and her life took an unexpected turn, making both her and all the people in her life much, much happier.